Welcome to Better Speech and Hearing Month 2024. So today and this month, I have a few guests, and today I have Asma and Khayat. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Perfectly.
Lovely. I have you on as a guest. You are a speech pathologist as well, and I wanted to have you come on and talk with me about dynamic assessment. I think this is a topic that is not covered enough, and that's why I wanted to have colleagues from all around join me to discuss this topic. So before we begin, would you like to present yourself?
Sure. So, as you mentioned, I'm a speech and language pathologist. I completed my studies back in Lebanon, back in 2011. So, I used to work in a school context, and in a private clinic. So, I got the chance to taste both sides of our job, which is really, which I consider myself really lucky to be able to work in both contexts. As I've been here since 2021 in Quebec. I'm completing now my master's in education sciences at Université de Sherbrooke, and I will hopefully finish this summer. And the good news is that I've also got my practice permit to be able to practice my job that I really appreciate and love here in Quebec. So I finished my equivalency process at Université Laval, and I'm so ready to embark in this lovely journey.
That's amazing. Just quickly, I'm curious, how was your equivalency process here? So coming from Lebanon to Quebec, how was that experience for you in getting your equivalency? Did you feel like you kind of had to redo everything all over again, or, did they make it easy for you?
I love this question. Actually, a lot of people ask me, how did you do it, and why did you do it? And how come you finished it within the pandemic, So I started the process in 2019, and it was really a long process because I had to do some courses, and I didn't have the chance to attend the courses in presence at some time. But I was really lucky to be able to attend the other courses here in presence in Quebec when I arrived at 2021, and also to follow some some short trainings actually. But I would say it was really beneficial because, I got really updated on so many information that I have the difference in culture and difference in all the way we learn back in Lebanon and here. So yeah, it was really interesting.
So that is super interesting that you have both experiences. Well, now you'll be embarking into your experience with the Quebec Canadian culture, and you'll be able to get that difference between the two. And this is what we're talking about today, right? So I wanted to embark in this topic of dynamic assessment because there are so many differences in cultures, in language. When we talk about language, often we have differences in culture that are attached to the language, regional differences, and all of that. So as we're jumpstarting this conversation here in Canada, as you know, it's Better Speech and Hearing Month. And this year, the theme is communication is. So I'd love for you to tell me from your perspective, what is communication, how it maybe varies from culture to culture, as you have this different lens too, coming from Lebanon to Canada.
I really appreciate that you are starting your Learn and Launch chit-chats with this topic, because I think as professionals, it's really important to keep reflecting and remembering what really communication is, because, like in my opinion, communication is really fundamental, and it's really the essence of the human connection. First of all, it makes us a human, right? So it's really important to know how to use it and why we are using this communication. So it really has a broad meaning. To me, it goes beyond exchanging simple information. It really means like exchanging intentions sometimes, feelings, emotions, and it can vary like among persons. So the persons may express themselves orally or verbally. Others can express themselves using gestures or signs. And what's beautiful about it, is that it's really different across, like, among cultures. For example, in Lebanon, as small as it is this beautiful country, we have a culture that is really, really rich. And like, for example, we have many accents, different dialects, but we have one famous sentence that we use it all, like, hi, kifak sava. This is our trademark sentence. I don't know if you know it, but
Yes,
it's like hi in English, then kifak in Arabic, which means how are you? Then we answer the how are you by sava. So, and most of all, I think communication is a right. Every person has the right to communicate, to understand, to express himself or herself in the way that works best for him or her. So,
yeah. I love that. I love that. I agree with that. And I love the example that you gave, the hi kifak sama, because it's so typical. I'm of Egyptian background. So my parents are from Egypt. And I've had this experiences with some of my cousins that have lived in Lebanon for a few years, or family or friends that have been living there and have come here. And yeah, it really brings it's warm when you hear someone say that to you, to greet you. You feel okay. Well, for me, it gives a sense of home. It's like, okay, I belong. These are my people. And that's what communication is. It's those subtleties, the way of saying things, expressions we use, how we code mix, right? That's code switching that brings that that sense of culture, our communication exchanges. And then there's all the nonverbal things that happen to it. And these things we're learning, right? As we work with different families, populations, cultures, languages. I love to learn these different nuances in using these maybe different, like I would say a typical, at least in my household, that tut 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 you get from an Arab mother who's disapproving of something you're doing, or just that stare, like you might die right away if you don't stop exactly what you're doing. No words need to be said, but that look right there says it all. So, connecting this with dynamic assessment, I think dynamic assessment is important because we don't know all these nuances, all these cultural differences. And as SLPs, we need to stay informed and offer the best service that we can when we're assessing. We want to try and be culturally responsive, really. You and I have discussed this offline, and I'm curious, I would like for you to share, what is your experience with dynamic assessment? Is this a new concept for you? Have you used this? Do we talk about this? Did you talk about this in Lebanon? Did you learn about it? Were your colleagues using this? So talk to us a little bit about your experience with that.
Actually, to start with the fact that, did I learn this in Lebanon at university? No, I didn't know even about it. It was always about static assessments, standardized tools, batteries that we have to do it in a passive way, in the most objective way. And in Lebanon, we had a challenge that we didn't have much normalized assessments. So it was always about translated assessments. And I remember I was the first promotion graduated from the English, let's say, speech and language pathology degree.
Okay.
So I talk Arabic, French, and English, but then at university, I chose to study in English. So I was the first promotion to be graduated at an English SLP. So we hadn't so much tools to use, and I got a chance to get in contact with, not in contact, but I got a chance to try 2 types of assessments that are really American assessments. For example, I remember the TORCs, and I was obliged to deal with this kind of assessment to work with my patient who is which I have to assess him in the written language assessment in English.
Right.
It's when I realized that it's really something that is not logic. What I'm doing is unrealistic. So this is one.
Something not very objective, right?
Exactly.
We we were taught objective measures, but it's not very objective when the test isn't reflecting the client that you're working with.
Not at all. I was like, I just has to do it because I had to do what I learned in school, I had to apply them to have the scores and just to evaluate in order to have a diagnosis for the child. But because I had an experience in an IB school, like the school where I used to work was an IB school, a private school. This school offers the IB program, which is inquiry-based program. So we talked a lot about ongoing assessments for learning, formative assessments. So we talked about nurturing the critical thinking of the children while also providing them with the authentic and dynamic context. So it was really an eye-opening experience for me, if I would say, because I discovered then that there is a common ground between the IB vision and the formative assessments.
When you say IV, can you
IB, which is the International Baccalaureate Program.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I was misunderstanding. Thank you for clarifying that. Okay, continue.
So I had this feeling that it was really eye-opening, because in my work at school, I wasn't only a speech and language pathologist, I was also the learning support coordinator. So I had to screen and refer students to therapy. I had to give quick recommendations to teachers in classes, etc. So I had to deal with the students closely, not only receiving and observing in class. I discovered that there is common ground between this vision, the formative assessment, the kind of assessments we do to inform us about direct instructions about how the child is learning, what is his learning styles, what are his potentials in terms of learning new concepts, etc. So that there is really something common between this and the underlying philosophy, let's say, of the dynamic assessments. Although at that time they were not really dynamic assessments that I was doing. They were really attempts, because they were based on my need that I really want to discover my patient for the child with whom I was dealing in school.
So what were you trying to discover more specifically?
Exactly. So this experience at school made me change the mindset I had in terms of assessments. So I started to just think why I'm doing the assessment. Okay, then I discovered I'm not even assessing, I was testing, or I'm testing and tested knowledge in a specific context at a specific time. Maybe the child is not ready now to give me the answers. Maybe he's not exposed to this kind of information that I'm assessing. So I realized that I have to change this mindset from testing to assessing in order to come up with a plan and not to only come up with a diagnosis. So it's when I started to switch my practice in clinic. And of course, I did many trials. I had so many occasions where I attempted to complement the static assessments I used to use with other dynamic assessments, and it really started from here.
That's wonderful. I love how you just started to naturally realize, hey, this is not really benefiting anyone, right? Just getting, like you said, testing versus assessing. What is this child? Let's learn about this kid. Let's learn about this child's learning style, learning ability. What do they need to get there? Right? So, okay. So I'm curious, in the establishment that you were working in, were they accepting of you were you talking to your colleagues about this? Were you telling your colleagues, like, this is not making any sense for me. These tests it's not giving us what we're really looking for. Were you alone? Like, how did you then get to the next step or continue to do this?
Actually, in school, my experience was different than in clinic, because in school I was dealing with formative assessments, like, for example, phonics assessments, or a child, or maybe a reading comprehension text with questions. So I got the idea to accompany the child with the assessment during the assessment. See how he's working, what are his challenges. And whenever I find that there is a difficulty somewhere, or there is a wrong answer somewhere, and of course I accompany the child while having in mind all the observation notes I did before, all the comments of his teachers, etc. So I used to triangulate, if I could say, all these data together while accompanying the child. And I used to attempt some trials during the assessment. So I used to change the instruction, minimize the text. I used to remove some words that I found difficult, for example. So I used to try several strategies as scaffolding to see what works best with him. And it was really, really changed. Teachers were really comfortable with this kind of direct intervention that I used to do during the assessment. And it helped me a lot, not only to inform the teachers about the modifications or the adjustments that best work for the child, but it also helped me to get back to the parents, because, I have to go back to them, tell them what did we do, what did we observe. And this helped me a lot to convince them. If, for example, I see that, okay, this child has to be referred to a speech therapist or not, or it's only language difference, maybe he's a bit late in acquiring some concepts. So it really helped me to make my mind on, and in a confident way, let's say, and it helped a lot in convincing parents. It was a real process. Sometimes parents don't really accept the fact that their child has some challenges. So while providing them with examples, and not only with a challenge, but also with solutions to that, they end up being very open about discussing the solutions for their child. So it started like this in school. In my clinic, actually, I had different experience because sometimes we get to receive some assessments that are done for us and not at LP, and I have to read it, communicate with the therapist, read scores, and even some clinical judgments. And although I have all these information, I struggle really to get in contact with the child to know really what's happening. Okay, he has a language disorder. Is it? Why? So I used to just stop on the assessment and start right away the intervention. I find myself going through some different tasks to really know what works best for him in terms of intervention strategies. And it really facilitated the intervention process.
And do you find that it also is like if you were receiving a report where there was just a hypothesis, there's no formal diagnosis, they haven't concluded to a difference or a disorder. Can you talk to us about, really making a clinical decision? And also, I think people are really interested, like having given workshops, people are interested in maybe if you can lend us some real examples of real tasks for reading, for example, or oral language. People don't get to see it enough. So they're like, okay, how is this in real time? What exactly are we doing? And how are we doing this? How long are we taking to do this? What specifically? Okay, so.
Exactly. Actually, it's really easy. I just found myself using real objects instead of papers. This is one. So the trick is really to first get the child engaged in this assessment. So not only provide him with a paper while I'm holding a pen and just writing the results by the time he's reading or he's answering you. So the first thing I did is I moved from the assessment desk. I went to a small chair with a small table. Let's play together. So I started this real interaction with the child, and I did a connection. I started with a connection with a child. Okay, we are going to play. Let's say I remember one time I did a task, or I wanted to check his oral language skills. So I wanted to check his ability to say a grammatically correct sentences. So subject, verb, object. And the child during the assessment wasn't giving me so much juice. So I remember I just played with animals. I had a farm. So I used to model. So first, and I even didn't do the protocol of dynamic assessment, the test, teach, retest. I started right away with modeling. And I checked what would the child give me during this task.
Yeah.
And to my surprise, I discovered a lot of things that I didn't read it in the assessment, or I didn't see it in my previous standardized assessment. So I started to ask myself, okay, what did change? Probably connection. probably the interaction that has been like the interaction that's been going on during the play we did. And after that, I realized that the child is able to model. He's able to know, of course, with the help of the scaffolding and the support I provided. I used to test. I used to remove and add some support, some visual cues, some auditory cues. Like I used to play with it. I let myself just go normally with playing while keeping in mind my goals, what I want to see. So it's not only motivating and engaging for the child, it's also for me. Because I went out from this passive, strict environment to a more open, dynamic, from its name, like dynamic situation. So yeah, that's one example for me.
That's a great example. But, you said you weren't really doing test, teach, retest, but in a way you were, because you decided to focus on connection, which I always talk about. And I think it's a really big part of working with multicultural and multilinguistic families, is creating a connection with the families and with the child, and knowing how to establish those connections. But then, so you prioritize connecting with the child, which is so important. And I think that's a good starting point for when teachers are asking themselves, okay, what can I do with this child who's not speaking English or French yet, and they're in an English or French classroom? And then 2, you made it fun. So you're connecting, you're making it fun. It's not so rigid and structured. Yeah. But you also, in some cases, you had your test, you had your pre-test, even if it was from previous months or from another SLP, you kind of had a baseline. Actually, if the child changed age, you had a baseline. You had an idea of what the child was able to do previously. And you were like, okay, so let's try out a few things. Would you say that this kind of resembles intervention?
Yes, because I used also to finish all in the beginning. I used to finalize the static assessment and discover later on, when I start officially the intervention session, that this doesn't even reflect what I saw just last week with the child during the assessment. And this was also another reason exactly why I have to actually go into some dynamic assessment sessions. So this was also one of them. And I would add also the fact that sometimes during the standardized assessment, I used to doubt on the attention of the child, whether like it intervened in the results, whether it changed or not the results. So it's also something that I used to give me some hints. Okay, probably he wasn't attentive. Probably his mom was out and he's not used to this kind of the context. He's not even used to see me or to interact with me. So another thing is that I let the mom or the parents be inside the room with me to make it even more fun and even more natural. Sometimes I get parents to interact with us also when I find that the child is really, really not interacting, Yeah. So I found myself not necessarily tapping into his abilities or into his potentials. So I wanted really to know what is the maximum he can give me. What are his views? And this really helped me also, the parents, I had always been asked the famous, also I have a famous question that I used to been asked by the parents. How long will the therapy will be? This child need. So, these kinds of assessments help me a lot to predict the child progress. Because with the parents, I used to not only talk about research and usually kids have this or have that. I used to talk about, was he responsive during this kind of assessment? Did I put so much effort? I put so much effort, but it's still a homework. I don't think I can do this or do that. So it really helped a lot with to predict also the progress that can the child offer.
I love all these perfect examples, because this is the $1 million question that we often get from parents. How long are we in this for? And it's difficult to tell when if we've just done, like you said, these standardized tests, and then suddenly we're in intervention and we're seeing a completely different child. And some of the reasons you named, connection wasn't there. If we're just focused on, I found that for a long time, I was really focused on, okay, I just need to get through this task and this task and this task. And I had my checklist and I'm like, okay, tick, 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 did all this. I'm writing a report. And sometimes I'm feeling like these kids are all the same, but they're not the same. They're all individual. They're all different. They all have their, special abilities, their needs also, and they all need different kinds of support. But then seeing how a child is responding with different levels of support, sometimes they need a lot of support. So we're able to tell parents, like you said, well, maybe this is a little bit too hard. So, and this is where our role plays in with the parents, as we team up and we're like, okay, well, maybe this goal can be broken down into X, Y, and Z because this bigger goal is a little bit too difficult right now. But your child is responding well when I provide this and this and this. So we can start on one of these sub goals that would then be able to build up to this, let's say, narrative goal. And you want to work on vocabulary and macro structure, let's say.
Yeah.
I love that. How are you able, based on how the child is responding, to tell between difference? Let's say we have a multilingual child, a difference between languages. Let's say the child is stronger in one language and not as much in the majority language in which we're testing, because often SLPs will be testing in the majority community language because they don't often speak the home language of the child. How can you tell if it's a difference between these languages or a disorder? Like, what is it in this dynamic assessment that is telling you or helping you guide and inform your diagnosis?
Yeah. Actually, also, when I started this type of or this mindset, I had in mind, as I told you, I wanted not just to diagnose the child, but also find or be able to write goals to put a plan, a realistic plan for him. So for this, this kind of dynamic, interactive, authentic kind of assessment lets me to see the child as natural as he is. And the fact that I used to let parents be involved helped me a lot, because sometimes the child, for example, it was always the Arabic language that I used to use in the session because, it's the Arabic, it's the majority language. But knowing that parents or kids are exposed from early ages to English and French, sometimes at the same time. So I used to check not only the interaction with me, the interactions and the answers to his parents. So this is one. I used to also see, as I told you, how much effort I put. Yeah, and I put so much effort. Okay, I put so much effort. There is a good improvement, or I put little effort and no improvement. So these kinds of analysis help me a lot in tackling the real challenge of the child and differentiate between, it's a disorder. I'm doing a lot of effort and there is really low improvement. And sometimes I say, okay, I put small efforts and look, he needs only to be stimulated. He needs only to be exposed to this kind of context, for example.
Yeah.
So these factors are really major in deciding whether it's a difference or disorder. I read something not long time ago. It said that data in our major as SLPs is really essential. Like, we play with data. This is our job. They mentioned something really interesting, saying that what is most important is difficult to measure, which also gave me a light here that, because, we can easily do this. We can easily conduct an assessment. Yeah, the instructions are there, the example, everything. If he does this, you do this. If he doesn't do this, you do this. It's really easy to conduct this type of assessment. But what really matters is difficult to measure, which and here dynamic assessments came to my mind, although they are not difficult, but they don't really necessarily take time, but they are something, they matter. Like, this is the real child that you are interacting with. So yeah.
That is that's going to be my quote now. What is really matters is difficult to measure. I love that. Where did you hear that?
I read a post somewhere on Instagram talking about data and how we use it and the importance of connection before collecting data and before just going to conduct the assessment statically and finalize the diagnosis. So it was talking about the importance of connection, importance of really measuring what's important first, and then going to the cliche assessments we do because we have to do them.
So by curiosity, when you assess, do you always assess all the spheres of language? Are you always assessing comprehension, expression, content and form and use, and receptively? Are you do you do that every time? Because I think people are wondering, okay, but now do I have to administer all these standardized tasks and then take the ones that he or she didn't do so well on and then do dynamic assessment for everything? Like, what's let's say you have this new child, how are you preparing and not, let's say, taking 17 hours to assess this child, but how are you getting to collect what you need to write the report to then, go where you need to go?
Yeah. Actually, unless the child is not really interacting to the static assessments, where I have to really evaluate each profile, I used to rely on the static assessment that I have to do, and just choose some tasks that were really challenging for him, or maybe where I didn't get much information on, or maybe I put some notes. Okay, the child wasn't really, for example, attentive, or okay, here I doubt about his answer. Did he really understand the instruction? Because in the static assessments, we are not really allowed to give to explain, and we are not we shouldn't give answers. Okay,
right?
So what
I use do it like this, and I don't deviate, otherwise it doesn't count.
Exactly. So I use just to put some notes, and at the end I use to read my notes. Okay, I have to check this and this and this. And I usually use only one activity, and in this one activity, I try to include 2 or 3 objectives at the same time. For example, understanding, expressing, pragmatic skills, etc. Sometimes it's only one activity that's been done in about 20 minutes, and it will inform me about everything I need to complement my assessment. So it's really something that is fast. It's important to be selective, because we don't want to take ages in just assessing. We have to finalize. We have to end up with a plan, with a report. We have to report to the school, to the parents who are really eager to know. Okay, tell me about my son. I want to know. So, we don't have this much time. So selectivity is the key.
Yeah, that's great. And that's true. Mm-hmm. Well, I think with multilingual families, we do have to take some more time for so many reasons. I think creating the connection is so important. First, thoroughly gathering information from different sources, that will take up time. And what we actually do with the child doesn't need to take that long to inform not only our clinical decision-making, our diagnosis, but also to help us make decisions on intervention. Because if we've done dynamic assessment, like you said, you've already gathered so much information on who is this child? How is this child going to learn that? What does this child need one-on-one, or maybe in a larger setting? We can, give different levels of scaffolding depending on the environment. And all of this will be gathered pretty quickly through a dynamic assessment. Yeah. So why do you think, I guess you and I studied around the same time. I graduated also in, you said 2011, right?
Yeah.
So we graduated at the same time. So why do you think that standardized testing has been taught as the gold standard? Why do you think that we haven't talked more and more about dynamic assessment? Sorry, I'm just going to add a little something to that. When now more and more, half of the world population is at least bilingual or multilingual. These are, statistical facts. So that means that more and more kids coming into our office, they're not just speaking one language, they're speaking or exposed to many languages. Going back, why do we think that standardized testing has been taught as the gold standard? This is what you have to do.
I think like, you know, at the university, we always learn the basic things. And I never believed that what we learn at the university is everything we have to know about our major or about the job. And it's not even in speech therapy. Like, I believe that we learn skills mostly. We learn, for sure, we learn information. We get to know more about our job, how to do it, etc. But I believe that we learn also skills, but we don't learn everything about the job. So it's our job to do to continue this job. So static assessments have been used worldwide. It's something ritual that I get a population, I create a test, I normalize it, and then I create tables that are really standardized on a population. And my belief was always that, okay, this test is normalized to a monolingual English speaking person, people or children, right? But even with those kind of tests, I was never convinced that this type of test also applicable on a child X who has other issues or other challenges. So what if the child comes from a different culture, from a different linguistic context? So it's really our job to be more dynamic, to be more open, to use all our senses, not only the standardized and static tools that we have in hand. So I believe that we have to take things in a holistic way, or holistically, to really discover all the aspects of the child that makes him or that help him learn.
And I think right now, like in a classroom setting or even in daycares, we still haven't come to the point where teachers are able to have this kind of holistic approach. You know, it's always been done in a certain way, and education hasn't really changed for hundreds of years, unless you're in an alternative school or kids that are being homeschooled, where, you know, I guess the person who is doing the teaching can adapt themselves to different learning styles, and all of that. I think there's a lot that plays into that as well. And I think because of research and science that, you know, things have to be controlled so much to be able to say, we can never say with certainty, but with enough certainty that we can say, okay, we can take these results and we can apply them maybe to a lot of these kinds of kids. I think that's where it comes from too, the research world.
Yeah.
But yeah, go ahead.
I think also the situation where I used to be in a context where we had few assessments that were standardized, but most of them were translated. I wasn't really in a comfort zone, let's say. Yeah. So this has let me see and let's say nurtured my curiosity to know more about, to find other ways to complement and to write an assessment that I'm first convinced about, that really matched the child that is in front of me, and then continue the process, the cliché process of the assessment. So I think, yeah, it comes also from the experience of the person, of the
100%. I feel like over here for many years, as SLPs, I guess before you would have arrived, like earlier in my career, we always knew that standardized testing can't necessarily be applied. So we used to add this sentence in our report saying that we are using these scores as a qualitative measure, not quantitatively, but still this static result, like you said, it wasn't matching up with this child that's with me. When finally if I get to do intervention with this child, I'm seeing a completely different child. I'm not seeing what I saw in standardized testing. So exactly. I'm curious if in Lebanon, just to see a little bit contrastively here with the schooling system, were you required to provide scores in order for the child to get access, for example, to SLP services or public healthcare services in speech and language? Or because in some establishments here, we know that, you know, the government, if you're filling for the parents can receive subsidies if their children have need a lot of support. It could be for speech and language or for other developmental difficulties. So were you faced with that? And if so, how did you advocate for the children to say, hey, this is not, I can't do this for this child because this doesn't apply. This test here, these scores mean nothing.
Yeah. Actually, I think I was doing a part of this responsibility to advocate for these kids, because once I took the step to move out of the box and just explore and observe the child, interact with him closely, whether in school or in clinic, I had enough data with me, more than the static assessment, because in Lebanon, no, it doesn't work this way. We are not obliged, or we just focused on the numbers or on the scores. Even the scores, talking about myself, I used to analyze them in a qualitative way, because they don't match the person, the population I'm working with. So I used to use them as a reference to see sometimes the progression of the child, the regression, when I do some evaluation records every 6 months. So really the whole record, whether it's qualitative or quantitative, that really guide the referral of the child. And I think this is really positive, because imagine if we just relied on the static scores, it would be really difficult for these children to have access to additional services. But talking about myself, I used to always have this, a big part of clinical judgment, a big part of reporting on what I did in the dynamic session that I did with a child, and better inform parents or centers where the child is referred to. So this is how I used to do it.
Over here, a lot of colleagues that I've spoken to or other SLPs have told me, working in the public sector, because I work privately, have told me that sometimes they just do the tests to do them. So it's like such a shame to even say that, or to even have to do that, because it's a waste of time, of resources, when that time could be spent, helping the child rather than just passing tests aimlessly. And they will say, okay, we're just doing these tests. We know that the child won't necessarily be scoring, so they're going to get the services that they need, because they maybe don't have experience with this type of task, or they haven't experienced this type of vocabulary, because we know that vocabulary tests are really, really biased culturally. And yeah, they'll just do them just to get these probably terrible scores. Maybe some kids are scoring well, but still not informing us on anything. And so, this is okay. I think for kids, well, it's not okay, but for kids who have more severe difficulties, this might go. But for some children who are on that borderline, who we know, we can often feel like there's something, it's not a tremendous difficulty, but they're struggling. It's like they're always kind of treading water to keep up with their same age peers. And this is not, this is not the way that we should be doing things. I feel like we have a big role to play to advocate also for ourselves in what our best practices, and for the children too, to be able to provide the best service possible and not waste time and resources, because all of this costs money too. These establishments are paying SLPs to spend hours writing these long reports.
Exactly.
It's just, so talk to me a little bit about your reports. Like, are they short and sweet? Like, how do you, I think people also want to, in that time efficiency, right? When we said, okay, this doesn't have to be long, it doesn't have to be lengthy. I think the best way for someone who's starting off, and you can maybe give your tips, is you can do a couple of standardized tasks and then organize another session in the evaluation where you've taken some time in between to gather more information, look at the results you have, and then plan what you might do next session in that connecting with the child, doing tasks that they enjoy doing, and testing these kinds of comprehension, sentence production, vocabulary generation, fast word learning. But yeah, how do you go about writing your reports?
Unfortunately, as you mentioned, it's sad to know that people who are reading the records should see name of standardized tests to be convinced about the validity of the record I'm offering. Yeah, so I didn't have the choice. but to do or write my results. What did I come up with in the static assessment? So I usually used to start with the results and but from the static assessments. But then I used to keep myself apart where, in addition to the clinical judgment and all these accessory of the report, I used to call them the accessory of the report, the clinical judgment and all these stuff that we talk about in a subjective way. I used to write a part about what I did in addition to this assessment to show that these scores, okay, this score, for example, on the expressive language, it's low, yes, but it doesn't really show the child's ability. So I used to explain what I did in this session. I did this part, this task. He behaved like this. He produced this type of sentence. After a few trials, he was able to use a subject verb of object simple sentence, for example. I used to also write what kind of cues I used to be able to help him produce this type of sentence. I used to ask also his responsiveness, his interactions during this task. So I used to keep myself a good part of the report talking about what I did in addition to the static assessment. And that's really helped a lot because most of the questions I got parents or from the teachers in schools were about this paragraph more specifically. Because, they were scores. They were the last sentence describing whether it's a delay, whether it's a problem, whether it's a difficulty, etc. But it's more like they are interested in this part of the analysis more. As I used to be, and I used to be really excited to explain more about it because it really made me feel that what I did is really efficient and it impacted their way of thinking about the child.
And do you now you're entering into your Quebec practice? So thinking about, how you practice in Lebanon and how you'll be practicing here, what do you think of severity scores? And what would you say to colleagues who maybe aren't doing dynamic assessment on how can they best use their judgment to decide, depending on different ages, different levels of language ability too, if for how much time they've been exposed to that second language or third language. And what kind of advice would you give to a colleague who's getting started on this and who's like, yeah, but I need to put a severity, or how do you know, if I have a 6-year-old or if I have a 10-year-old, if I'm doing oral language or if I'm doing written language, how are we, what are we basing ourselves on as a comparison, let's say?
I love this question, but I'm afraid I won't be able to advise properly because I really had a modest experience and it was really a self-taught experience throughout the years. But I really believe in the utility of these dynamic assessments. Yeah, I understand that everything that is new is really it makes us sometimes unstable because we got used to one type of assessment, checking the reference to see the severity. And this is all, as I said, this is the most easiest part of the assessment, in my opinion. The hardest thing is really to dig into the child's cognitive processing and see how he's learning. And this is more exciting because this is what informs me more about his abilities, his potentials, more than a knowledge that he might be exposed to or not, and I'm still testing. So am I testing the word, for example, spoon, let's say, and he always uses the fork to eat. And if he answers me, it's not necessarily the wrong answer, for example, for him. Even if this answer is not in the correct answers of our Restley's book in the assessment. I think the key is to be more open, to listen to the child. It's important to use all our senses throughout the assessment. We don't have the choice, as we mentioned before, data are data, and we have to put them in the assessment. But adding this twist to the assessment really matters, not only for us, to the parents, to all the caregivers, and also talking about reports. At the end, report is a document that will accompany the child throughout at least his childhood, let's say. It can really impact positively or negatively his, not only his life, his parents' life, the life. So we have to be really, or we have to write it in the most accurate way. I'm not saying static assessments only and just like, I'm not eliciting a conclusion about static assessments, but the best way is really to complement both and do the trials. And in my opinion, even if we take baby steps in these dynamic assessments, whenever we do one step, this one step will lead us to the other step. And this is how I learned that actually. And now I'm really excited to know more about dynamic assessments, the proper way, the more professional way. Not like how I learned them by myself. For sure, I did a lot of readings. I matched my clinical experience with what I'm reading. I did those matching sessions with myself, but it's all about change in the mindset that we have to. Yeah.
But I love that you're here today sharing your experience with us, because we all have to start somewhere, right? So I don't think that it's right to say that there's a more professional way or less professional way, because I think that that is exactly what is dynamic assessment, is that it's spontaneous. It's using our senses, like you said, being intuitive, listening to the child instead of focusing on these tasks, and creating that connection and getting information that will be the most valuable. Like you said, when you're meeting with parents, teachers, educators, and they're asking questions, they're not asking you questions about those standardized tests. They don't know how to interpret those results. What they understand and what is going to help them and us in intervention, and the child inevitably, is how he's responding to intervention, what types of support he or she needs. And like you were saying, I think you said also, it can do a service or a disservice to the child the way we write our reports. Because if we're just doing standardized testing, and even if we're saying that these tests don't apply to this child because it's a multilingual child, if the child is bombing every single task and is not doing well due to probably lack of experience with the language, with the types of instructions, with the type of task also, and the way we're interacting with the child, which could be culturally biased against that child, then what do you think is coming up in the report? It's all negative. It's all, okay, it's severe, or the child's not able to do this and not able to do that. But instead, if we're using dynamic assessment, we're able to talk about what's helping the child. How's the child respond? You know, you talking about the responsiveness and the types of supports and what's helping the child, and where is he lighting up? Where's that aha moment happening where this child is like, oh my God, yes, this is what I needed to get to where the SLP is testing the child, is that scaffolding zone. Oh, that's lovely. So I'm sure we could talk about this for like many more hours, but we're wrapping up the hour. Can you share with us where we can find you if we want to know more about, I don't know if you're sharing on any platforms, LinkedIn or Instagram or Facebook. Are you sharing any of your practice with us? Where can people find you?
Actually, I still don't have a proper professional page, but it's on my plan. But I really love to share and exchange these kinds of discussions with other colleagues. I can provide my email happily, with pleasure, and I'm really open for any type of conversation to not only give and help others, but also to learn more and more. So yeah, thank you so much for this lovely discussion. It was like, really, I wanted to get these out, and it was a chance to.
I love I wanted to have you on because you said to me, you know, I don't have a lot of experience with dynamic assessment. I said, that's great, because the other people who don't have so much experience with dynamic assessment want to hear, where did you begin? How did you do it? What are you doing? You know, I feel like as SLPs, we're a lot of us, I'm going to include myself in there, are type A personalities. It has to be done 110. I need to know exactly the recipe, A, B, C, D, E, and I'm going to do it. Like you said, right? Those standardized tests. Give the instruction, score it. Give the instruction, score it. repeat it, can't score it, whatever. We need a protocol, but there is no protocol. And so it's nice that you came to share your amazing experience discovering this all on your own and really helping these multilingual, multicultural kids. So thank you so much for coming on. And I look forward to more exchanges with you. And yeah, so happy Speech and Hearing Month, everyone.
Thank you so much. And bye.